What is poppin' to all of you lads and lassies out there? It's your truly mate Drew in here, signing in, and I would love to welcome you all to my showcase of all these video game controllers I own. Alright, so I've been collecting some of these controllers for brand new for the past couple of weeks, and I still made sure that they are still brand new, as I can reckon that they're still brand new till this day. And I've counted these controllers, and it appears that I have over 50 plus controllers. Yes, I know, it is crazy. Alright, so how I'm actually going to do this showcase is that I'm going to show you lads one controller separately. And I put these controllers in its chronological order. If I got the order all mixed up, I apologize for that. So, with that being said, let's get on with the showcase, shall we? Now, just keep in mind, if I have two of the same controllers, like it's the same model, I may as well show both of them in the video. And I'll have one controller tangled up and I'll have the other untangled. You would get the idea. So, as we begin, these two controllers here, these are what's called the CoolBaby NES controllers, and as you can see, it has 4 buttons, and normally a NES controller has, you know, 2 buttons, and I just want to give you all this warning, is that the CoolBaby NES console, it's basically a bootleg of the NES Classic, so it's a waste of money. It's basically full of bootleg games like Super Mario Brothers, for example. And I gotten this somewhere around, well, I got the CoolBaby console somewhere around in, I think it was somewhere around December 2017, I believe. I'm not entirely sure, I couldn't really put my finger to it. Now, this controller, since it has like 4 buttons, it's alright, but never again playing on the CoolBaby NES console ever again, ever. But I'd just rather get myself the NES Classic console, because it's way more better than the CoolBaby console. So anyways, that is the CB NES controllers. Okay, so next up is the Super Nintendo category, and here we have is a original Super Nintendo Entertainment System controller. Now, I rarely use this controller, so I wouldn't be able to use it anymore because of how old it is, and the select and start button, they're just it's not as durable as it is. But I'm just surprised that this controller would still work, but I just don't use it anymore. And yeah, there's not much for me to say about this controller. It's very old, and I've had this controller for many years, ever since I got in my Super Nintendo console. So yeah, that is the original Super Nintendo Entertainment System controller. Okay, so next up we have is a Super Famicom controller. Now, if you're wondering what a Super Famicom is, it's basically the Japanese version of the Super Nintendo. This controller, it's just the same model. Well, any Super Nintendo controller is like the same model, right? But, except for the fact this one, it has Super Famicom on it. Now, this controller, it works alright, but there's a bit of a small problem, is that the select and start button are having a bit of technical issues to it. But on the bright side, this controller is alright. So that is the Super Famicom controller. Next up is my TTX unbranded Super Nintendo controller. And of course, is that same thing, but it doesn't have Nintendo on it, but this is actually a TTX, because I got this from a website called GameDude, and in GameDude is where they have a lot of these controllers, so this is where I got this controller from. Now, haven't used this controller that much, but I'd say it's a pretty good controller, even though it's like, I believe it was like $9, and that's pretty cheap for a controller like this. So that is the TTX controller of the Super Nintendo. Alright, next is the super famous card Super Nintendo controller. Now, as you can see, it has all these switches here. Now, I got this controller somewhere around back in 2019. I got this from a place called, I think it's called Eddie's Retro. Now, as I first thought is that this controller is very amazing, and it's pretty wide, and it's pretty comfortable for my hands, you know, but there's a bit of a problem with this controller is that the A button is having a bit of malfunctions to it, and I tried messing around or fidgeting with the A switch, but it's just throwing a temper tantrum. Now, I haven't been using this controller in a while, so that's why I got new controllers, so I'd use those more often than just using this, but that doesn't mean this controller would go to waste. So I still like this controller. It's reliable, and it's still durable as it is, as if the A button wanted to be so, you know, wonky or bad if it didn't actually have this malfunction. So anyways, that is the super famous card. Okay, next up is the Super Nintendo mouse. This is a Super Nintendo controller accessory that you plug into your Super Nintendo console, and yes, this is the plug. And the Super Nintendo mouse is mainly used for Mario Paint, for example, and you know, even if I actually play Mario Paint on my Super Nintendo emulator, I would just use the mouse on the computer, you get it. So I don't think I'll be able to use this. Well, I think I can if I can be able to set up my Super Nintendo console, but I'm just too lazy to do so. So I'd just rather play Mario Paint on my actual PC. And it's got 2 buttons as well, and it has a trackball, but I do not have the Super Nintendo mousepad, but it's not like I really need it. But yeah, that is the Super Nintendo mouse. Okay, moving on. Now, despite the majority of the controllers, they actually have controllers that have USB ports. So here I have is a retro incorporated Super Nintendo controller, and this is basically the NTSC model. I think that's what it is called. So because this is retro incorporated, this is a USB controller. And yes, of course, as I said before, is that some of the majority of the controllers, they actually have USB versions of it. Now, I got this controller, of course, from GameDude, and it's a pretty good controller. It works pretty nice, and I've actually been using this controller the first I actually got this from GameDude, and it's not too bad. It's alright. And the buttons work, and the select and start, and the L and R buttons, and yeah, this is a pretty good controller. So that is the retro incorporated. Okay, next up is the Hyperkin SNES pixel art controller. Now, this is a pretty fancy looking controller. I really like how they did with the design. Also, it is another USB controller. Now, I have a little bit of a problem or a bit of trouble or struggle with this controller, is that the buttons are quite boxy, and with the D-pad as well, and the select and start button, it just seems like you gotta apply a bit of pressure to it. But I'm just really grateful to have a controller like this, even though it's a pixel art controller. And I'm not very sure if I want to make videos using this controller, so it depends. So that is the Hyperkin. Okay, so next up is the Super Nintendo TTX NTSC Classic Controller. Now, there is a difference between this and comparing it to a original Super Nintendo controller, and yes, of course, it is a console controller. Now, the difference between this controller and a original Super Nintendo controller is that this has a pretty smooth curved shape to it, and it's a bit circular. Now, I really like this controller. I think I got this for like $12 from GameDude, and I can actually make videos of this controller if I feel like it. And it's pretty good, it works, and I really like this controller. So yeah, that is the TTX Super Nintendo Classic Controller. Alright, next up is the QuickShot, and look how big this controller is. Like, it's almost the size of my hand here, as you can see. It's pretty crazy. So, the QuickShot. Now, this controller has a pretty nice design, but the D-pad, it doesn't really impress me that much. Like, I would have expected this controller to have a very good, decent D-pad to it, but it's not that as great as it seems. And the B, A, X, and Y buttons, they work alright, and the R and L buttons, they work pretty fine as well in the select and start, even though it's like pretty much one button, so you gotta like press one at a time, so you can't like press both. And you know, I like this controller. If I can be able to try to make some Super Mario World hack videos or some Super Nintendo emulator playthroughs using this controller. So yeah, that is the QuickShot. Next up, or do I have a treat for you? This is my Honeybee Super Nintendo controller, and for a fun fact, lads, if you all did not know, this is the controller I was actually using to make the videos of the Super Mario World horror hacks I've actually, you know, made content out of this October, which was last month. And this was the controller I was actually using to make those videos. And I had to admit that I'm gonna have to choose the Honeybee controller here to be my favorite one, even though the D-pad, it goes into like 8 directions, and the B, A, and X and Y buttons, I really like it because it actually has it's got a bit of a thick layer of plastic to it, and the L and the R buttons, they work alright, and the select and start, yada yada. Now, I will be able to make more videos using this controller. I'll be able to use the other Super Nintendo controllers like the QuickShot and the TTX controllers that I have. So I don't always have to use this controller to make, you know, Super Mario World hack playthroughs using this controller. Don't always have to. But I really love this controller, and even though it's my favorite, I'm just really glad to have it. So yeah, that is the Honeybee. Okay, so next up is the Honeybee Competition Pro, and this controller kind of looks like a Sega Genesis controller by the looks of it. Now, this controller, I've gotten this on eBay along with the QuickShot. So I got the QuickShot first, then later afterwards I gotten this controller, which is the Honeybee Competition Pro. Now, this controller, unlike the super famous card, is that it has all these switches. I went on ahead and tested this controller, and I was so excited to be able to give this controller a shot, but it turns out I was quite disappointed because this controller, it has some malfunctions, and it's not that as operational and functional as it would seem. And I would have expected this controller to work as perfectly as it should. And even though this controller is tremendously old, so you wouldn't be able to find this in stores anywhere, and this controller has existed for like many years. But I'll just let this slide, is that I'm happy to have this controller and own it. So yeah, that's all there is for me to say about this controller. So that is the Honeybee Competition Pro. Alright, so next up is my Super Nintendo scope, and it kind of looks like a big-ass bazooka, and unfortunately I do not have the accessories and the Super Scope 6 game to actually go with this controller, so let's just say that I just have this controller like it's a collector's item, so there's not really much for me to say about this controller. So of course, that is the Super Scope, or the Super Nintendo Scope, I'd say. Okay, so that wraps up for the Super Nintendo controllers, so we are now going to get into some Nintendo 64. So first, I have two grey Nintendo 64 controllers. Now, the first one right here, this controller, this one does not work that well, and back in December 2018 is where I gotten my Nintendo 64 console as a Christmas gift, and it came with these two grey Nintendo 64 controllers. But yes, this controller here, it doesn't really work that is great, even though the buttons are really faulty. So that is why I use this one instead, because this controller, it works okay. It's not really the best Nintendo 64 controller I've used, but there are some other Nintendo 64 controllers I have that work a bit more better than these two. So those are my two grey Nintendo 64 controllers. Alright, next up I also have a regular Nintendo 64 controller, but it's in red, and this controller works a little bit more better than my two other grey Nintendo 64 controllers. But the thumbstick, it's just a little bit wobbly and jittery, but in some regards this controller is alright. So that is my red Nintendo 64 controller. Alright, next is my black USB Nintendo 64 controller, and alright, so if you can see, do not question why I put green tape on this controller, because I believe when I got back from my trip from New South Wales is that I got this controller on eBay, and as I went on ahead and tried this controller, or played my Nintendo 64 emulator with this controller, the Z button was broken, but I think this controller still works. But this controller, I have not been using this in like many months, so yeah, that's what there is, or all that I can say about this controller. I'd just be very surprised if this still would work, and that I could probably make videos using this controller, but it's just ridiculous that the Z button is broken, and it's pretty silly that I put green tape on it, so don't actually ask why. So that is my black USB Nintendo 64 controller. Okay, next up is my golden TeknoGame Nintendo 64 controller. Now, I love the detail on this controller, and the thumbstick, it is perfectly fixated, and it's very smooth, and the buttons, it's got that clicking sensation satisfactory to it for me, and I really love this controller. It's very awesome, it works perfectly, and I'm very, very glad to own this controller from the Gamecube website. And I'm mostly going to be using this controller, or that I'll be using this controller more often, unlike all the other Nintendo 64 controllers I have, so yeah, that's all I have to say here. So that is my golden TeknoGame Nintendo 64 controller. Alright lads, are you all tired of wanting to huddle around with a regular Nintendo 64 controller that has three handles and you're trying to form the best grip to your Nintendo 64 controller? Well, in that case, you're going to need these two controllers. These are called Horipads. So I have two of them, and they're by Retrobit, and I got them from the Gamecube website, of course. So I have a red Horipad, which this is the USB version, and with this controller, I'm going to be mostly sticking to using this controller for when I make videos of the Project 64 emulator by using this controller. I'm going to be sticking to that mostly. So the red one here is the USB version, and the purple one here is for the console. And with these two Horipads is that what we all know and understand is that it's best to try new things whether we like it or not. So if you're getting tired of using a regular Nintendo 64 controller, but it'll be best to actually use a Horipad, which is this. And the thumbstick, it's actually more bigger, and the button layout, the C buttons and the B and A buttons are, I'm pretty sure they're the same layout as what a regular Nintendo 64 controller has. And the start button and the D-pad, it's in a bit of a different position. Well, the D-pad's in a different position, of course. And it's also got two Z buttons. So you're gonna get that, you know, top trigger and bumper action to it. If, you know, I reckon to say, if you're an advanced gamer and you want to use controllers that look like this, for example. So yeah, those are my Horipads. Okay, so that wraps up for the Nintendo 64 controllers. So coming up next is some Nintendo Gamecube controllers. Now, I only have 3 Gamecube controllers, so first up I have is a grey/silver standard Nintendo Gamecube controller. Now, do not ask why the thumbstick grip is missing, because it broke off, so don't ask why. Now, I got this from eBay, from, like, I'm pretty sure it was like a few years ago, And I haven't been using this controller in like a bit of a while, so if I feel like I want to set up my Nintendo Wii, I can just be able to use this controller again, you know, just by playing Smash Brothers. And this controller still works. I just, you know, I'm always just thinking that even if a controller that I have not used in like months, I'm just, you know, saying or actually thinking that it would still work even if I haven't used it in like months. So even though this controller still works in any way. So that is my grey silver Nintendo GameCube controller. Alright, next up is my MadCatz GameCube controller. Now, I have not used this controller in like a few years, and apparently I do not use this controller anymore, even though the A button is basically jammed and it's broken, so that's why I won't be able to use this controller anymore. But if I can try to be able to fix the A button and make this controller fully functional. And I don't think I actually own that many MadCatz controllers, so this is like the first MadCatz controller of Nintendo GameCube that I would own. So that is my MadCatz GameCube controller. Alright, next up is my TeknoGame orange Nintendo GameCube controller. Now, as I showed you all my grey/silver Nintendo GameCube controller, I can't really clarify that it is a TeknoGame, so I think if I can know correctly I think I might try to find out if my grey and silver Nintendo GameCube controller is also a TeknoGame. So here I have a TeknoGame GameCube controller in orange, and I got this from Game Dude as well. And the thumbstick is pretty good. It is pretty good. The C stick, A button, X and Y and B start. The L and R buttons and the Z button as well. Now, I'm also going to be using this controller more often, so I'll still be able to use my grey and silver one if I can, you know, by playing two honorable mentioned games like Mario Kart Wii and Super Smash Bros. Brawl with these two controllers. So yeah, that is my TeknoGame orange Nintendo GameCube controller. Okay, so now that the Nintendo GameCube controllers are out of the way, so we're going to move on to some Nintendo Wii. So here I have is a Nintendo Wiimote and a Nunchuck. So these two controllers, they work just fine, but it's having some problems is that whenever I play my Nintendo Wii games, the Wiimote decides to have a connection interruption. But I wouldn't say this controller is in it's not that bad for its durability, and that it's not... These two controllers, it's not in the worst condition, but they still work, and I still use these two controllers regardless, and they work just fine. If I can, maybe I can get myself a new Wiimote, so it wouldn't actually, it would have like, I would say, it would be less problematic. But however, these two controllers, they work alright, so yeah, that is my Nintendo Wiimote and the Nunchuck. Alright, next up is my Nintendo Wii Afterglow, and sadly this Wiimote or controller does not work anymore. But however, it's a pretty nice looking controller for its design, and that it has a green button. It has like, if you can see it, there's a green button, and it actually makes these light up effects to the Wiimote, and that's pretty cool. But it's just really unfortunate that this Wiimote does not work anymore. But if I can, maybe I can replace it, who knows. So that is the Afterglow. Alright, next up I have two Wii Wheels. Now, I'm not very sure if these two count as controllers, which they're basically an accessory that you just place your Wiimote into it, and then you just play, you know, like Mario Kart. You just put I guess I can say a form of style you put into the gameplay, you know. And these two accessories, or maybe I can reckon to say controllers, even though I'm not very sure if they are controllers, but they have a pretty neat design, so that's all I have to say here for these two Wii Wheels, so yeah, moving on. Okay, so these two are called Nintendo Wii Zappers, and have you ever thought that Call of Duty was actually on the Nintendo Wii? Yeah, and when I actually used one of these Nintendo Wii Zappers to play Call of Duty, it was a struggle. And believe it or not, I'm not really that great, or I'm not really the best at, you know, when it comes to motion control on Nintendo Wii, so that's why I don't have fun using these Nintendo Wii Zappers. So it's gonna take a lot of learning to be able to get used to with these two accessories, or maybe controllers, as I said with the Nintendo Wii Wheels. So yeah, moving on, so those are the Nintendo Wii Zappers. Alright, next up, this big ass beast of a controller. This is called the Wii Balance Board, and this is mainly used for Wii Fit. Now, believe it or not, I have not used the Wii Balance Board in for like so long, and if I can try to be able to get back to playing some Wii Fit and use the Wii Balance Board. And if you lads want me to, I can be able to make videos of playing Wii Fit and using the Wii Balance Board. So yeah, so I hope you all... I don't even know if I want to do videos of Wii Fit, but if I do, make sure you all stay tuned for that. So that is the Wii Balance Board. Okay, next up is my golden Nintendo Wii Classic Controller Pro. And of course, it is a controller that has to be, it has a nunchuck connector that has to be plugged into your Wiimote in order to use it. Now, I really like the design of this controller, and it has like, you know, two thumbsticks, and unlike the Horipad for the Nintendo 64 and the Nintendo Gamecube, the thumbsticks, it goes like this. It goes into a circular octagonal-ish rotation, and I really like that. And never again, because I was playing Call of Duty on the Nintendo Wii using this controller, and one of these buttons, you know, B, A, X, and Y, one of these buttons you push is to where you sprint, and it just feels so damn awkward. And never again playing Call of Duty on the Nintendo Wii, ever. No, that's not going to happen again. Because Call of Duty is better played on other consoles, you know, besides the Nintendo Wii. Also, with this controller, it's got two Z buttons, as I said before, as I showed you all the Nintendo 64 Horipads. It has the trigger and shoulder action buttons. You get what I mean. But however, really like this controller. It's got a nice design, nice color. So anyways, that is my golden Nintendo Wii Classic Controller Pro. Okay, so we have jumped into the conclusion of every Nintendo controller I can show you all, so we're going to move on to some Xbox. Now, I only have two controllers, so here I have is a standard black Xbox 360 controller. And I like the design of this controller and the way it's shaped, and it's been many months since I've ever played on my Xbox 360 console, and believe it or not is that I have two Xbox 360 consoles. One is the black version, that actually works still, and I have a white Xbox 360 console, but apparently it has the red ring of death, and I wasn't actually expecting it when I actually set it up, the white Xbox 360 console, so I'm just left with the black version of the Xbox 360. But I really like this controller, and it still works, and I just really wish I can be able to get back to playing on the Xbox 360, but chances are is that Xbox, and I'm not really a big fan of it, so that's all I have to say here for the Xbox 360 controller, so moving on. Okay, next up is my Rock Candy Xbox 360 Wired Controller, and I really like the color. I really like the color and the looks of this controller, in that it's in transparent, and the thumbsticks and the D-pad is in white, as well as the trigger buttons and the bumpers as well. And yeah, it's a really nice looking controller, but unfortunately I do not I don't have the cord to go with this controller, so I'm pretty sure this controller is mostly or mainly used for PC, but I'm pretty sure this controller still can be used on the actual Xbox 360 console. Now, I've had this controller for quite a couple of years, and I still have this controller, well, I guess I can say I have this controller as a collector's item, so just happy to have this controller, but I'll be able to find the cord if I can, if by any possibility. So yeah, that is the rock candy. Alrighty, so next up I have two Marvo GT controllers. So here I have is a Marvo GT14 controller, which is the wired one. And here is my Marvo GT60, which this one is wireless. But if you really want to, I guess you can actually just, play the PC games with this controller manually just by, connecting it to a USB to your computer if you really have to. And I don't know how to actually set up the Marvo GT60 wirelessly and just play PC games with the controller in wireless. But I really like these two controllers. They have a nice design, and that, not sure if this is actually like PlayStation or Xbox, or maybe it could be some sort of hybrid. Who knows? And if you guys want me to, I can be able to make videos using these two controllers. So anyways, that is my Marvo GT controllers. Okie dokie, so moving on. And upcoming next is every Sony player's dream console. That's right, the PlayStation. So here I have two digital PlayStation 1 controllers. Now, just to be fair, is that with these two PlayStation 1 controllers and that they are digital, the thing is that when it comes to video game controllers, I'm more into the analog style. So I'm more of a video game controller analog player. But if I really need to, if I have a feeling, if I really want to set up my PlayStation 2 and just, or if I would actually think of some PlayStation 1 2D side-scrolling games, like, for example, SpongeBob SquarePants Super Sponge. I'm not sure if you all know what that game is, but that game is my childhood, just to let you all know that. And that's why when I play that specific PlayStation 1 game, I just use this controller, since it is a 2D side-scroller. And also the R2 and L2 is the buttons are just like that. But however, these controllers are really nice. They're not as bad. They're alright. So anyways, those are my two digital PlayStation 1 controllers. Speaking of analog, here I have two analog PlayStation 1 controllers. Now lads, I want you all to take a look at this controller right here. Take a look at this one. Look how yellow that is. It kind of seems like this controller looks like it's been in a friggin' tanning bed. Or it's like this controller had a friggin' tan. Now, and that's the thing, because I've had this controller for so many years, and I'd be so buggered and shocked if this still works on my PlayStation 2 or PlayStation 1. And even though this controller is in very horrible condition, and I don't know why the thumbsticks are like that. Not sure if they're supposed to be meant like that. Maybe I can just look up on the website, or maybe they're supposed to be like that. But yes, this controller is just so damn yellow. It's really old, so what can I do? I don't know if I want to clean it or not. It depends. But just looking at this controller, haven't used this controller in like quite some time, and even though that this is actually a PlayStation 1 controller, it does work on PlayStation 2, but there's some games that doesn't actually allow the use of this controller, which is a bit of a shame. But it's a pretty neat controller. But I swear to God, with this controller, I'd be so buggered if it actually still works. So anyways, those are my two analog PlayStation 1 controllers. Okay, so now we're gonna get into some PlayStation 2. So here is a standard Dualshock 2 controller. I'm not sure if you all can actually see it, but it's right here. So yep, this is my standard Dualshock 2, and apparently the R2 and L2 buttons are having a bit of technical issues to it, so it's it's pretty wonky and it's bouncy a bit. So that's why I don't actually use this controller that often, so I'm still going to keep this controller regardless. So anyways, that is my standard Dualshock 2 controller. Next up, I have two TTX PlayStation 2 controllers, and honestly, just to say this, I didn't actually know these controllers were actually TTX until I actually found out. Now, these two controllers, I really like them, and they actually work pretty well. They work really good, and I really actually, you know, I also want to say this as well, is that I like controllers where it actually has to do with TTX, or when there's actually TTX controllers, like these two, for example. So yeah, those are my TTX PlayStation 2 controllers. Next up is my Dragon Ball PlayStation 2 USB controller. Look at the details of this controller. You know, it has the orange color to it on the analog sticks, and the D-pad, select and start. I think that's the analog button. The L2 and R2 and L1 and R1 buttons, they're all in orange. I really like that choice of color. Now, this is actually, of course, it's a USB controller, so if I can be able to, I can try to make videos using this controller. It's a pretty nice looking controller. I also got this from GameDude as well. So, yeah. So anyways, moving on to the next controller, and that is the Dragon Ball PlayStation 2 USB controller. Okay, this next controller, this is a pretty fancy, nice looking controller, but I do not know what brand this controller is. This controller is pretty faulty, so I don't actually use it that often. But I don't know if this controller is actually a MadCatz. I don't think I can clarify that this controller is a MadCatz. I couldn't really put my finger to it. So, yeah, moving on to the next controller. So lads, if you all know what this controller is, please let me know in the comment section below. It'll be much appreciated. So, moving on. Next up is my 4Gamers PlayStation 2 controller. This controller is really awesome. I like this controller. I got this from the Grand Plaza of Australia, and I can't wait to actually get back to playing some PlayStation 2 games while using this controller. It's really awesome. It's got the slow, analog, and turbo buttons up the top where it says 4Gamers, as you can see, and the L2 and R2, L1 and R1 buttons. Yep. This controller, I like it a lot. So anyways, that is my 4Gamers PlayStation 2 controller. Okay, next up, this is my favorite PlayStation 2 controller. This is my second TTX PlayStation 2 controller. And my thoughts about this controller? It is excellent. I am very, very happy to actually own this controller, and I can't wait to get back to playing more PlayStation 2 games using this TTX controller along with the 4Gamers PlayStation 2 controller. And I got this controller from the GameDude website as well. So anyways, that is my TTX, or my second TTX PlayStation 2 controller. Okay, moving on to PlayStation 3. So here I have two DualShock 3s, and I just hope these controllers, I think these controllers still work, but I haven't even used these two controllers in like a few months. You know, that's the thing, I know I've said this many times, but I have so many controllers, but I haven't even used them in like a few months, and I just want to get back to using the controllers that I actually haven't used in like a few months. I know I said this many times again, but I just wish to get back to using, you know, the controllers that I have that I haven't even used in months. However, with these two DualShock 3 controllers, they're pretty good. They're alright. And I just hope that these controllers are still going to, you know, fully be functional, and they'll just actually cooperate with me. and just not actually have faulty technical issue problems with it. So anyways, those are my two DualShock 3 controllers. Alright, next up, this is my DreamGEAR Shadow. Once again, another fancy and good looking controller. I like this one very much. And I got this controller from GameDude as well, and because that this is a PlayStation 3 controller, it's also compatible with PC. And I think I'll be able to do some videos using this controller. You know, I got some controllers that I actually want to make some videos out of, and I know how satisfying that would be, and I know how fun that would actually be as well. So anyways, that is my DreamGEAR Shadow. Moving on. Okay, the last controller category we have is PlayStation 4. So here is my standard, normal PlayStation 4 or DualShock 4. Now, just to give you lads a small announcement is that I am making plans of wanting to get the PlayStation 5 this Christmas, but that is dependable, so we'll see what happens when the day comes, if I can be able to get myself a PlayStation 5. So, here about this controller, I like how it's actually in a green camo color, and I use this controller most of the time, even though I have two other PlayStation 4 controllers, and yeah, I really like this controller, like its camo color, so that is my DualShock 4. Okay, next up, this is my Nacon PS4 Wired Controller. Now, I'm not really a big fan of this controller, even though it is a PS4 controller, but however, the thumbsticks, they're a little bit small, as you can see. Yep, the thumbsticks are a little bit smaller, but with me playing Call of Duty with this controller, it wasn't that great. So I had a bit of struggle actually playing COD with this controller, so it's really difficult. Also, this controller works on PC as well. So anyways, that is the Nacon Wired PS4 controller. Okay, this is the last controller of this collection. This is my A-Play PS4 Wired Controller. Now, just want to tell you lads, this is that my experience with playing Call of Duty with the A-Play PS4 Wired Controller and the Nacon PS4 Wired Controller, it's been pretty bad. Horrible. But however, with both this controller and the Nacon Wired Controller, it has some potential. But these controllers, two of these controllers, they're okay. But they're not really the best PS4 controllers, but I still have a bit of potential of liking these two controllers, so they're okay. But even though with this controller and the fact that I have big hands and big thumbs, but this controller I had much worse with using this of playing Call of Duty. And that's what the flaw that I'm looking into. Well, I've already looked into that specific flaw of why this controller is what I had so much struggle with of playing Call of Duty. But however, as I say again, is that both the A-Play PS4 controller and the Nacon PS4 Wired Controller, those two controllers for me, they are okay. But anyways, that is my A-Play PS4 Wired Controller. And there you lads and lassies have it, and this is the conclusion of my video game controller collection. I want to thank you all very much for watching, and as always, like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video. Peace out lads. Cheers.